And to that end, I have traveled not only to Minnesota, but to Wisconsin and California to meet with members of the Hmong community and the Lao community as well. As I think you know, I'm going to be finishing my 3-year assignment as the Ambassador to Laos sometime this summer. Don't know exactly when, but this trip will be my last opportunity to talk to you as the U.S. Ambassador to Laos. The first time I came here to Minnesota, I had a similar session with interested Americans. At that time, I'd only been in Laos for a few months, about 7 or 8 months maybe. Now I have the benefit of all of 3 years' experience, which clearly does not match the experience that many of you have had in terms of understanding and dealing with Laos. But I should mention that I did have the opportunity as a child to live in Laos in the 1960s. My father worked for USAID, so my involvement goes back many, many years. And more recently with the State Department, as the Senator pointed out, I've worked on Lao issues along with other Southeast Asian issues, both in the State Department as well as at the National Security Council. So I've had some perspective over the years. I know that all of you are deeply interested in the fate and conditions facing the returnees, the Hmong that were returned from Thailand in December of 2009, and in particular the 158 that were determined to be persons of concern by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. And I promise you I will talk about that. But I'd also like to spend a little bit of time to talk to you about current conditions in Laos and why I believe that overall Laos and U.S. relations with Laos are moving in the right direction. And I'd also like to tell you a little bit about some of the programs that the U.S. has to help encourage this movement forward. And I want to talk to you a little bit about how we can focus the relationship, not just on simply resolving the legacies of the past, but also on how we can look to advance future opportunities. This is particularly important this year because this is the year that will mark the 55th anniversary of U.S.-Lao diplomatic relations. Unlike in Vietnam, where after 1975 diplomatic relations were suspended for 20 years, we never suspended diplomatic relations with the Lao government, even though we reduced the level from ambassador to a chargé d'affaires for many years, but we have continued to maintain a relationship with the Lao government. I also expect that since this is the 55th anniversary that we will host a senior Lao leader in Washington for the first time for meetings, which will allow us an opportunity to discuss a range of issues, including the issues that are most pertinent to you, which is the situation involving the Hmong. I'd like to ask a question of the audience. I'd like to ask those of you who have visited Laos in the last 10 years, or those of you who have close friends and relatives who have visited Laos, to please raise your hands. Okay, so I'm not very good at numbers, but I'd say maybe 10% or so of the audience has been to Laos in the last 10 years.
More than that.
More than that, okay, 20% maybe. A few people who didn't raise their hands probably should have raised their hands.
Do it again.
This time for real. Okay.
No, it's like 30%.
Well, I asked you to do that because I want to test some of my perspectives on those people who have been to Laos and to see whether you agree with me. I think that, I think you would agree that the country has rapidly modernized in the last 10 years or so, and the economy has expanded significantly. But that said, there are really deep disparities between different groups in Laos, between those who live in the Mekong River Basin and other river basins, and those who live in more isolated areas, particularly up in Outside the major cities, people remain very poor. They live primarily as subsistence farmers. The infrastructure remains undeveloped. There's few rural roads that are paved, and most of them are impassable in the rainy season. 2/3 of households in Laos have no electricity, and about half of them have no access to safe water. Life expectancy is low. Child mortality rates are the highest in Asia. 40% of all students do not complete primary school, and nearly 20% of children have no chance at all to go to school. But in spite of these serious challenges, I believe that the situation in Laos continues to improve. And I remain optimistic about Laos' future for two reasons. The first is that the ideas of free enterprise, rule of law, are influencing governments all through Asia. And Laos, too, is feeling these influences. An important step took place recently, well, not so recently, 13 years ago, when Laos decided to join ASEAN. And through its involvement with ASEAN, Lao officials have become increasingly exposed to international political and economic practices and standards. Laos is also increasing its international exposure and involvement more broadly in the United Nations, with Western Europe, with Japan, with Korea, and increasingly with the United States. At the same time, Thai television is bringing in news broadcasts. Internet is not interfered with. Admittedly, very, very few people in Laos have access to the internet, but those who do have access to the ideas that the internet makes possible. More access, more information about open societies. The second reason I'm optimistic about Laos' future is that I've seen how capable and how productive the new generation of Lao young people are. How eager they are to expand their knowledge of the world, to seek out new opportunities. And we should remember that more than half of the population of Laos now was born after 1975, so it has no direct experience with the immediate war, although some with the aftermath of that war. Let me turn very quickly to a rundown of U.S. interest in Laos and also a brief discussion of some of our bilateral activities. The U.S. strategic goal in Laos is very simple. We would like to see a country that is at peace internally. We'd like to see a country that is integrated into ASEAN, integrated into Southeast Asia, integrated into the world economy. And we'd like to see Laos remain a country that is not unduly influenced or dominated by any of its more powerful neighbors. Our objectives include continued reform based on open markets of the Lao economy. We like to see the government be more open. We like to see that government more respectful of the rights of its citizens. And we would like to see the U.S.-Lao relationship broaden its base. I think the key tool that we have to accomplish those objectives remain a very simple one, and that's engagement. The new administration has come into office with a very, very clear, articulated policy of seeking to strengthen relations with Southeast Asian countries collectively, and that would be through ASEAN. But also, within ASEAN, there's a great disparity between the new countries that entered ASEAN, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Burma, and the traditional, longer-standing members of ASEAN. And Secretary Clinton has announced what we call the Lower Mekong Initiative to help the United States focus its engagement with Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam, particularly in areas that transcend borders. For example, environmental protection and response to climate change, promoting educational opportunities, promoting health, again looking very carefully at emerging infectious diseases, pandemic diseases, and also to some extent infrastructure, which is important to the overall development of the region.